Okay, so firstly, welcome everyone to this skill chat for today. We have Sam with us today, who's talking about Core Web Vitals, which I'm sure everyone here knows how important this is. So, and also, yeah, thank everyone for joining us. So, Sam, did you want to quickly introduce yourself, just for people who might not know exactly who you are?
Hello. My name is Sam Carlton. I'm a web consultant from a city called Tulsa. If you're familiar with America or Oklahoma, I'm a serial software entrepreneur and advisor consultant. I've been building and advising on software for over 10 years. I'm reading off my credentials on my Apple Notes here. I've built the largest online community for Apple Silicon compatibility info, a site that is optimized for Core Web Vitals. And what we're gonna go through today is kind of the learnings from that, as well as the learnings from different Codeable projects I've worked on for Core Web Vitals.
Yeah, sorry, just before you start, to explain everyone the format. So this is going to be broken down into like 3 parts. So if you have a question, so each part will talk about certain aspects. So if you have a question during that one part, we'll stop every sort of 15 minutes or so, and then we're going to take extra questions at the end. So kind of hold off on the questions. If something Sam has spoke about, then ask the question, obviously, and then at the end we're going to do a full open Q&A, and we're actually not sure, we could go over as well. So if there's a lot of questions, we could extend the skill chat to over an hour, depending on how many questions we have. So yeah, feel free to ask questions if Sam has discussed something that, if you have a question about something he's already discussed. So yeah, I'll let you start, Sam, and yeah, any questions, just leave it till we have a pause.
Excellent. So I'm going to start with what is Core Web Vitals, just to cover the bases. So this is Google's new search ranking factor that ranks that, in addition to the other 200 or so ranking factors, this also decides your rank based on performance. And so all those 200 or so factors factor into where your site shows up on Google search. Performance now has a bigger impact than it did before. It had a kind of indirect impact before, because faster sites naturally get more engagement, but it wasn't explicitly put as a ranking factor in Google before. So this means you can the organizations that you're working with, or the clients, will now have a better excuse sheet. It's easier to explain why performance is important. You should be building sites that are fast and quick for users no matter what, just because as a web developer, you want to do the best you can and build engaging experience and valuable products and websites for your clients. Now you just have a better justification for it. So just getting right off the bat, these are the results for impressions that I've gotten over the last 3 months on the Does It Arms site. You can see I started out and I had it kind of optimized at 99%, and recently it's dropped down to 60% of all my URLs, which is about 3,500 URLs. They're now only 60% of those are reporting as good URLs or good page experience, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But basically that means is that that's the amount of URLs that qualify to get the search ranking benefit that comes from Core Web Vitals. What this has done is, over that 3-month period, that's an 18% increase in traffic. That accounts for 18% of my traffic that I've gotten over that period. So Core Web Vitals works a little bit like this as far as what the actual result of what you get from it. First, you get your Core Web Vitals passing. And the funny thing is about it, this is not necessarily the 0 to 100 score. Core Web Vitals are 3 metrics that they get measured in addition to your 0 to 100 performance score in Lighthouse. So you get your Core Web Vitals passing, then you get Google page experience clicks. And basically this is the search ranking benefit. This is the specific name that they have for it. And you can measure this in your search console. Then you get traffic, and that in specific context, that traffic has different kinds of value. In e-commerce, it's going to have some of the highest value because you can directly correlate that extra traffic to dollars. profit. So the way you measure each of these steps are different tools. So first is Core Web Vitals passing. You're going to measure that how you already have been with web.dev or Lighthouse or PageSpeed Insights. You run that page on there, or you can also use Lighthouse within Chrome to measure it. I like using the websites because they're not necessarily, no particular score is the right score or the most accurate score, but I like using the web.dev or PageSpeed Insights to measure it because it's from a centralized point. So a client can go and measure the site and they'll get a similar result as opposed to just measuring it on my Chrome tools. I'll get a good valid result, but that's a valid result for my particular device, my particular internet connection, and so on. And so using those online tools can give you more regular and predictable results. The next stage is measuring your page experience clicks. And this is what you measured in Google Search Console. If you see the link on the top, the sam.lc/faster, you can actually pull up the resources link, and you can find the specific link where you can find that Google Search Console experience results, and it will show you for the properties you have right now, what kind of benefit, if any, those are getting. And then lastly, you have traffic and analytics. This could be Google Analytics, this could be Fathom, or whatever analytics platform you're using to measure your traffic. So the Core Web Vitals are 3 metrics. First is largest contentful paint, and that this is usually the most difficult to improve. The second is first input delay, and the third is cumulative layout shift. Now, the interesting thing about first input delay is it actually can't be measured synthetically with the web page test. There's a correlating metric that is close to it, but since there's not a real user to click on the first thing on the page, the online test has no way to measure first input delay. That is measured with field data versus lab data. So the lab data is when you use the online tools or the Chrome tools without a user. And the field data is actual data that Google has captured from real users and their experience on the site. Field data tends to be, although not always, it tends to be a little more generous than the lab data. And so if you're crossing the metrics on the lab data, you're probably doing okay. And largest contentful paint is the closest thing to a load metric. It's the closest thing to done, but it represents the largest element on the page and when that's done loading. And then cumulative layout shift is the stability of the layout. If it doesn't snap, does it, when you click on, or you're about to click on something, does it move under your mouse? Does it shift as it's loading? Because that can lead to a very negative user experience and cause people to leave. And so the way this works with search is if you get all 3 green metrics, you're going to get the search benefit. And so you can see here, you have the individual numbers of 2.5 seconds, 100 milliseconds, and 0.1. If you get in the green for those metrics, you get the search ranking benefit, and it's guaranteed. If any of those metrics if it's mixed between green and orange, you might get it, but it's not guaranteed at that point. And if any of your metrics are poor, you do not get the search benefit because the whole score is considered poor. And so usually what happens is people will get first input delay, cumulative layout shift fixed easily, but they run into issues with largest contentful paint. Now, the funny thing is, if you get largest contentful paint into the green, if you get all your metrics into the green, your 0 to 100 performance score does not matter. But it does not matter for traffic. You can still get it across if you want to do a good job for your client. But once you've got all 3 of these metrics in the green, you pass and you're good to go. Like you're going to get the search benefit and you're going to get good traffic for your client. Core Web Vitals is not the most important factor. So you can't pick you can't do the American White House website and build a duplicate website and outrank the White House. That's not the way that works. It has to be equal relevance, and then once it's equal relevance, then you can outrank them with good Google page experience. It is very important, obviously, in competitive search categories. An example could be like crypto or different commerce categories. And the traffic increase is based on real device performance. So until you get that those real device numbers, it's giving you closest guess to what you're going to get out of that. And obviously larger sites are going to have a lot harder time crossing that LCP line. Field day is a 28-day average of all the traffic you've had. So when you make a change, when you make a fix, it's not going to happen. It's not going to appear immediately. You have to wait 28 days for those results to properly come in through. So if you do make an improvement, you might notice that your Google page experience percentage starts to bump up a little bit at a time. And that is a little hint to let you know you're going in the right direction. And again, changes can take up to 28 days. Any questions so far? Okay, I think we're good so far. Also, we'll have a big thing for questions at the end.
Yes, so sounds good.
So how do you check your core web vitals? So you can check them on your Google page reports on your PageSpeed Insights. I'm reading my notes here and they don't make sense. I'm like, why did I write this? So there are a few resources you can check out to use PageSpeed. So Lighthouse is the big one. It's that kind of the central tool. It's also built so it can be used within a browser, within just an automated testing environment, so it can generate the tests without you actually interacting with it. So one example of this would be on a Git repository where it automatically tests the deployments every time you make a small change to the site, so you can measure the performance changes across different code changes and commits. And then there's obviously PageSpeed Insights. This is the public-facing web tool you see where you type in your URL and test your live page, and measure your site speed. And then it also gives you the field data that it can for that site, and that's a good way to check that field data, which way it's going. You'll also get to see some of that field data in a different form in your own Search Console. So these are 3 sites that I captured data on recently. And you can see you have reddit.com, microsoft.com, and Netflix. So you can see Reddit, it has like a 33 on performance, and they're not all doing great. Netflix is kind of doing the best, but they're probably don't care about this yet. But if you notice something carefully, if you look at reddit.com and look at their first input delay and cumulative layout shift and their largest contentful page, there was one on here that they're all passing to the first 2 metrics, but they're having a hard time passing that largest contentful pane. Now, if I go to the next slide, you can see, oh, here we go, Amazon.com. Now, Amazon.com has a 34, 1 point better than Reddit. However, look at their core web vitals. Look at the largest contentful pane, first input delay, cumulative layout shift. They're passing all 3. So it doesn't matter if Amazon's performance score is 34 or 0.5. They're passing largest contentful pane. They're getting that search ranking benefit. So it applies separately from your performance score. Now, if Amazon does bump up that performance score, it's likely to create a measurable difference in their user engagement and therefore their sales. But for now, all they can get out of it is that core web vitals search ranking benefit. And you can see I also provided 2 other examples of Wikipedia and Google.com. And again, Google.com, they don't have a perfect score. They do pass all the core web vitals, but they're not perfect. They're not even perfect at their own metric. And what Wikipedia is just a very simple site, and so it's easy for them to score super high. But the funny thing is even Google products themselves that you embed on your site, just because it's a Google product does not mean it will help you with core web vitals rankings. Especially things like YouTube embeds have a bad, nasty habit of dragging down your performance scores, so you have to lazy load them in. Any questions? And then we'll do one stop for questions right here, and then after the next part we'll do the extended questions.
It seems like we're all good. We'll leave the questions to. I have a few questions experts have asked, so yeah, we'll just do the last segment here, and then we'll move on to questions in general, I guess.
Excellent. Okay, so final part is pass through core levels. This is the part that you guys have all been wanting to know about. My favorite way to get sites optimized is building with modern tools, like Jamstack and static-based frameworks. And you can connect those to WordPress and drive. There's things like Gatsby source WordPress and tools that connect to WordPress, so you can slowly migrate your sites over from WordPress content management and the front end, at least, from WordPress generated front end to a static front end. This isn't necessarily the ultimate final best way. It's just my personal preference. Some of those headless frameworks are Next.js, Hugo, Gatsby, and Next, and 11. And you can, if you want to go back and actually explore the previous headless talk I did, you can learn more about those. So for existing sites, this is the important part. These are some of the most important things to get those existing sites if you don't want to go and fully redo this a static system on top of an existing WordPress install. Images. I cannot say that enough. It is extremely important. Images are the #1 thing that drags down these sites. You can do a full Core Web Vitals audit and fix the images, and 90% of your projects, that's going to be the majority of that performance gain. It's going to come from just getting those images the right size and the right file types. Again, you get things like WebP. We're not using Internet Explorer anymore, so you can use WebP. It's supported on all the major browsers. Lazy loading, but also preloading. So if you have an image that appears above the fold and it's always going to be there when the page loads, then you don't want to lazy load that. You actually want to preload that so the browser knows to fetch that ahead of time. And that's another thing that people will run. They'll lazy load everything, and then they'll hit this kind of wall, but they've lazy loaded all they can lazy load. They actually got that. The reality is they've gone too far, and they need to take the images that are above the fold, or usually it's just one image preferably, and preload those with the HTML preload header tag. The next one is just simply the page speed and Lighthouse recommendations. Those are going to be some of the best to get an idea of where you're at. And you don't have to go to the top to bottom and solve every one of them. You can start, you can pick the ones that are easiest, the easiest wins for you first, so you can get some momentum going with that. And then caching solutions such as Cloudflare DNS, and there's plenty of other DNS and caching solutions. There's caching plugins as well. Those can help a bit. And then there's also static plugins. And so these are static plugins. There's two particularly popular ones called WP to static and Simply Static. Simply Static is one I actually prefer on my projects. And what they do is they scan the whole site, and they modify the URLs a little bit. So you can actually take your whole site and deploy it as just static HTML files to something like Netlify or something, or the Amazon S3 even. And what that does is it's effectively like a permanent cache, and then you can connect that to a build process where your actual real WordPress site is separate from the static site, the static front end that people generate. And it's kind of like a headless option, but without a headless framework. It's a little bit. Now, it doesn't quite give you the pure performance benefit that having full control of your JavaScript and CSS assets can give you, but it can be a solid step, especially for clients who really want to stick with page builders such as Elementor and things like that. And the other downside, the kind of nuance with static plugins, is that it doesn't have a server to reach out. So if you have forms on your site, you have to figure out how to replace those forms. You can't just use Contact Form 7 or Gravity Forms. You have to either use a third-party system like Wufoo or Jotform, or figure out a way to pass through those form submissions through to your real server. The next one is subdomain sharding. And so this is basically just separating out the parts of your site that you want to perform fast. And this can be combined with something like static plugin, like the static plugin generation, or a headless system. And then the parts that absolutely have to be loaded from WordPress from the server, you have those on a separate subdomain, such as accounts dot or checkout dot. And that lets you kind of pull off those parts. So there's the public facing parts that need to have that SEO performance optimization, and then there's the things that SEO and performance isn't quite as important, like to pass core web vitals. But what is important for those pages is that it can talk with the server. And the final one is a hybrid static site, and this is where you're kind of doing a little bit of everything, or a little bit of a bunch of things. So you might be pulling in a static site and then regenerating part of it with a headless framework, or some kind of mix like that. And so now we get to the main part of the talk for questions. Let them roll. Let's hear our first question.
Giles has one. Making your site headless, does this mean that the client will have less accessibility for them to be able to make changes, meaning extra costs for them?
Not necessarily. So the funny thing is, when regenerate a whole site from scratch, from every page, generating a static page can take anywhere from 2 to 3 minutes to as little as 30 seconds. So the funny thing is if you have this static generation process in the background, and you just tell your clients, like, yeah, you're getting this huge performance benefit, you're getting a huge traffic benefit out of this, but every time you click a button, it's going to take 5 minutes for that update to show up. That actually kind of already happens if you're using a caching plugin, but clients don't mind it, and they love the search benefit out of it. So, and as far as accessibility goes, if you're talking about user accessibility for blind and screen readers, it's actually even better because you get that specific control of your accessibility markup. Because you're not, it's the opposite of using plugins for everything. You're building all your code from scratch, and you're generating that custom markup, and you can integrate developer tools in there to automatically tell you when you're not passing certain accessibility requirements with automated checks. Next.js features this, and I believe Gatsby does too. And so you could actually get way better accessibility performance because you actually have full control of your markup in HTML.
You know what? I just wanted to throw in a question. So, Stefano actually asked a super cool question when he put it in the community post. He wanted to know if there's any secret weapons or magic tricks when it comes to using like a page builder, so using like Elementor or something, because I know that these page builders have a stigma of, oh well, not really stigma, they don't kind of rank as well as other sites. So what kind of tricks would you suggest for someone who has a client that like specifically has to use a page builder, and then they want really great scores?
Yeah, so for some clients, they have to have control over their content. They're going to want custom things, or there's something that is just going to take too long, or they don't want to invest in rebuilding from scratch with you.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's three solutions, two that I've already kind of mentioned, and one that I haven't mentioned yet. You guys probably actually know already. The first is going to be that static generation. So the benefit of those static generating plugins, they're not caching plugins, they're literally just generating pure HTML, effectively text files from your existing site. But all of that works with page builders. You can use Elementor, WP Bakery, whatever you want. The downside is that it's going to bring in all of the technical debt and asset weight that those page builders carry with them. And so you still have to do some whatever optimizations, Elementor, Divi, or whatever they offer to you. You have to integrate those in, and then you get the static generation after that. The second one is the subdomain sharding. So I've done this on several projects where you actually shard your builders. And so my go-to builder for integrating with these headless setups is Gutenberg. And so I'll set up systems where one will be Gutenberg, but one page will be Elementor or Divi. And so they can kind of pick and choose, and it'll either do a static generation of that site through the normal WordPress static generation plugin, do a headless generation where that headless framework is pulling in that data via WP JSON or WP GraphQL and generating that page for them. So they can, so if the client gets to choose which, where they want to come in at. If the big thing is performance, they're doing content marketing, they want to outrank Facebook on the search results, then they can choose Gutenberg and they can build it and make it work in Gutenberg. If they just want to get it out there and accessible and they just want to build it quick, then they can switch over to Elementor or Divi, whatever their default complicated, heavyweight page builder is.
Okay, that makes sense.
In the chat was two. One from Yanni. On regular WordPress sites, have you used critical CSS approach? And if so, what plugins do you trust do a good job of generating critical CSS properly and dynamically?
Most of my projects I'm working on, I try to push them towards doing some of that stuff yourself. So probably there's one that Google just came out with. I can't. Maybe I can look it up real quick, but usually there's purge CSS and there's CSS inliners that you can use with the headless setups. And so there's usually WordPress plugins that correlate to those technologies, those developer tools. And so they're kind of a WordPress plugin spin on those developer tools. So you get some of that benefit, and also that sometimes they can optimize a little better than those tools would automatically try to optimize, because they have more information because of the context of WordPress. They know the content from that's coming into it, and they know all the different plugins and all the different assets that are mixed in there, as opposed to normal developer tools have to just assume. And so they can give certain performance benefits. I don't know any inline plugins in particular. I know that I've used some in the past, but I can't remember the name of them. I would just go off of whatever you find, whenever you search on GitHub, those developer tools, see if there are plugins that correlate, that are just basically plugin versions of those developer tools.
Yep. Okay. There was another question from Joe Bailey. I don't know if he wants to unmute his mic or he wants the question asked.
Yeah, I can. Can you hear me?
Yep, sure.
Yeah, I just wondering, I've looked at this a few times with some sites recently. When it does come to dropping IE support completely, do you find that tends to make a noticeable difference to these metrics? So say you're changing a browser list config for things like Webpack to not sort of auto prefix or compile code for IE. Do you see noticeable gains on that?
Definitely. Not just because of browser prefixes, but because of polyfills. We're carrying so much extra weight because of the polyfills we initially created for IE. And so many, especially WordPress plugins, are bad at this. So many of the WordPress plugins have just assumed that people are still using Internet Explorer, and they haven't reassessed how they want to deliver their assets. And so there's actually more modern ways of delivering JavaScript and breaking it up into pieces that people just kind of ignore, because it's like, well, that won't work. And with the polyfills, we do that with polyfills, but usually 90% of your code, 99% of the polyfills you're using, you don't need. And you can just put a banner on the top of your site that says, please update your browser. I forgot to mention the third option, which for the question earlier, which was asset cleanup. Some of you guys are probably super familiar and love the asset cleanup plugin. If you aren't, then welcome. I'd like to introduce you to the gospel of asset cleanup plugin. It is amazing. It lets you selectively pull out the certain assets being loaded on each page, and it applies here as well. Some plugins will load polyfills as separate scripts, which is a great opportunity to just kind of pull those out, because the polyfills, all they're doing is looking for a particular JavaScript line that's a modern API, and it's giving a IE version, like an IE supported code for that line. And if you pull that out, then so much of your bloat is going to go down. And so there's also, but you have to go page by page in groups of pages to figure out the right, what can be taken out and what can't. But the benefit and why I love going the headless approach is that you get to have full control over all your resources. I suppose there could be a setup where you pull in your CSS assets and use something like Purge CSS to clean out, like Purge CSS combined with Purge CSS watching your whole static site, static WordPress install and cleaving out all of the CSS you don't need. I don't think there's an equivalent tool like that for JavaScript because it's much more complicated. But the benefit of headless is that you control all the JavaScript, so you get to only include what you need. And so for clients that are very, very, very serious about performance, you can provide that option to them. And usually I just make that the most expensive option. It's at least 10 times more expensive than anything else, because some clients will consider that. Does that answer that question pretty good?
Yeah, I think so. We have another question. Did Zilly, sorry, I don't know. Chris, did you want to ask this question? Zelchko. Did you want to unmute your mic? Or not? Yep.
Yeah, hi. I can ask it. No worries. Like, my question is for the accessibility. For example, I have a website like with high 90s on Google page speed, so like it's like 99 on mobile and it's 100 on desktop. But the web dev is giving me 79% score on the accessibility, and the main reason is the buttons do not have descriptive text. So the only links on the homepage, for example, are like 6 learn more buttons. And my question is, how big of the problem is this actually, and is there a way to handle it?
Yeah, I'm assuming that these buttons are being generated by a theme or plugin that you don't have control of the code of.
Actually, I do. It's like a portfolio showcase, and there is like a description for the portfolio item, and there for every portfolio item there is a learn more button, and those are the only links on the homepage, for example. Yeah,
if you have control of the markup, if there's a WordPress filter or WordPress action you can find, or if you can edit it directly, and when you do the Lighthouse test again, it'll give you instructions, and usually there's an article linked under each issue that tells you like, here's what it needs to look like. And it's usually just ARIA label or something like that. Literally just putting on that description and it'll fix it right up and make it go. If you can't change the markup, if it's a situation where it's a custom built thing,
so it's not like directly what it says on the text, right? Well, what it says on the button, right? It's like something ARIA label, as you said. So I need to change that and not the actual learn more text on the button.
Correct. Yeah, it's just an attribute. Sometimes it's good enough to the text inside the button is, probably because learn more is a very generic description. So
it says it doesn't have descriptive text, so I assume that it means like that I need to change the actual text on the button, for example, the learn more.
Yeah, that might be it. Because like, what are they learning more about? If it's 3 buttons under 3 columns, those columns have titles. You could say learn more about whatever the title name is.
Right. Okay.
The screen reader, you're tabbing through and it's saying, here's a column about this. Learn more. Here's a column about, or maybe they're only looking at the buttons because they're only checking the things that they can click on. It'll say learn more. How do they? There's 3 learn mores, but how do they know?
They technically know because it's in the same like column and it has like borders and everything, but it doesn't matter. That like I don't want to I want to drag this, but another question regarding this is like, how important is this? How important is accessibility for the Web Vitals?
It's for core Web Vitals, I don't think it matters yet, but I would anticipate at some point in the future, Google starting to factor in accessibility into search rankings. Because of how much this has resonated and how seriously companies are taking performance now because of this, I wouldn't be surprised if they're internally talking about letting accessibility affect it. But there's also measurable results because there's different levels of accessibility. Not everyone who needs accessible sites is blind. Sometimes they just need reading glasses and they just don't have their glasses.
But is this something that we as developers in the future need to think about? Because one of the things in the accessibility is for example, like what I saw, it doesn't have like good contrast on the site or something like that. Is that something that we need to worry about, or this
I would say
stuff that designer needs to worry about?
No. So to put this at an end, I would say yes, accessibility is going to be looked at in the future. It's something you should be looking at now, and you should be looking at it from as a developer, at least from a schema perspective of what you are tagging stuff with, and try to install a page reader on a site and tab through it, and you will understand immediately why accessibility is important.
Yep.
Cool.
Exactly.
I have another question, Sam. With the largest contentful paint, what is factored into that? Is it the DNS response time? Is it the round trip time? Is it the time to first byte on the server processing? What are the factors that make up largest contentful paint?
Well, largest contentful paint is going to be one of the latest metrics. So years ago, or still, we have the onload metric, but that's not like that. That tells you when the DOM is ready to go. So when all of your HTML is loaded and ready to read. That doesn't tell you when the JavaScript's done doing things. So if you have Vue.js or React and you're rendering your content and you trigger a thing on load, that onload happens before that framework content has been generated. And so anything that you try to access in that specific time, that moment of onload, if you're expecting to have React or Vue ready or whatever framework you're working on, it's not going to be there. It's not going to be generated yet. And so what's interesting, if you think about it, what happens before onload? Well, they get the start of fetching the HTML response. What happens before that? Well, you have the DNS, you have the server response. And then what happens before that? Well, you have the DNS finding the server. And then I think there's like another step or two before that. So technically LCP includes all of those together. And so it's your DNS response, it's your server response, it is your DOM, your full paint, not just like your onload event, but your JavaScript loading and rendering that initial like kind of like the largest chunk of the screen. That is when that pixel paint finishes. So
is it above the fold pixel paint, or is it?
So that's the funny thing, is you don't actually have to wait until all your JavaScript or all your assets are done loading. You can finish LCP before, your LCP can be 1.7 seconds and your total page load time might be 10 seconds. Usually you want to give a rest to the processor shortly after your LCP finishes, because it's not fun to be clicking through a site and then it's slow to respond. That's where first input delay comes in, because you can get your LCP done, but if you're still trying to sneak extra stuff in the background, then that's going to increase that first input delay time. And so that's the great thing about the three metrics, is you can kind of cheat one, but you can't cheat the other. And that's what they're trying to get people. So they want people to game the system because it's very difficult to game.
And how does it differ then from first contentful paint? Because that includes time to first byte as well. It must do.
first contentful page. I forget exactly what the definition is, but it's the first element, like the screen is white, and then the first element that gets painted, you know, one example might be the brand logo.
Yeah.
When that is finished and loaded, that's what that's why I believe that it might be some modified version of that, but that's what I believe it is.
Yeah, that makes sense. You know, I actually have a question. Now, this is talking more from a client point of view. Now, everyone on this call knows exactly all the technical ins and outs on how to read a score, but like, how do you handle, and I'm sure everyone has had this situation, you have a client that's obsessed with the GT metric score. Like, they're obsessed with it. Like, they say, I want 100 on this, and they won't look at any other score. So like, you could show them Lighthouse or whatever, and obviously every place has a difference. Not every time you get the same score. So how do you handle dealing with a client that's like, I want 100 on GT metrics. They're paying like $2.99 a month for shared hosting, so they have no kind of idea about like hosting performance or dedicated service. So obviously they don't understand what we understand. So how do you kind of handle a client that kind of is obsessed with that high score, and sort of how do you reread the kind of the output of the score and translate it so a client understands, look, this is realistically what you have to expect? You're using a page builder, you're using this host, that sort of thing.
So this goes less into the technical and more of the setting proper expectations for a client.
Yes.
Up front. And that's not ideal. That's not the way it always works. So I'll get into what if you're just kind of stuck in this bad situation.
So in saying that, do you have a max score for, let's say, a page builder? Like, do you say in advance to a client, listen, you're using a page builder, so your score, you should expect X amount, like that sort of expectation? Is that what you're talking about? And then for hosting, the same, setting a realistic score so they don't aim for 100 sort of thing if you know they can't get it.
Yeah, if you, and I want to get into how to set the expectations up front, because that's the most important, like, right way to do it. But if you're already there, it's like, why do you want to get to 100? Well,
exactly.
Well, that's the best. It's like, okay, you want to be the best. Why do you want to be the best? And it's this why conversation of like, why? And taking the time to understand these things matter. You're not ignoring what the client says. You're not trying to push an agenda on them. You're trying to understand. And so it's like, well, what does that do if you're the best? Well, we're going to get more traffic. It's like, well, why is that? And asking very obvious, simple questions that in reality, you might think you know the answer to, but you don't. You never know the exact right reason. But also the problem on the client side is that it's very obvious to them why. But what's very obvious to them is not at all obvious to you. And in fact, sometimes you have no idea about it. And so
exactly.
It's like, why does traffic matter? And you can even tell them, like, I want to work with you on this. I'm going to ask some very obvious questions, but I want to make sure I understand you very, very clearly. And you tell them, and you go through that conversation of like, why does traffic matter? And then for e-commerce, it's like, well, it's sales. You know, if we can get our traffic up, we can get sales. It's like, okay, well, would 90% get you there? Or let's go measure what Amazon's score is. Amazon's score is 34, I believe. Amazon's score is 34. So I don't try to set max expectations, like a universal max number. I will set, and I have talked with other developers, and they do something similar. Like, you'll set the very, very low bar of Amazon, Microsoft, Reddit. It's like, what are they? Okay, they're getting that. Okay, well, we don't have $500,000 for this project, so we're not going to beat Amazon. Or maybe if they do have $500,000, then we'll try to beat Amazon. But
yes,
we're going to try to get. We'll say we want to get 70% of what Amazon is. We'll get there. And as long as, you know, it's more about what they're at and where they want to get, and how far to that can you get them. if you want to say, if they want to guarantee, if a client wants a guarantee of a perfect score, of a perfect Core Web Vitals, you have the right to charge 5 or 6 figures for that. That is a reasonable price.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and that might seem like a lot of money, but that's what it's going to take to get to that metric.
No, it's cool. It's just because, I mean, these stats are so easy for just anyone to access now. Like, it isn't some secret how to get your Core Web Vitals. So it's just, I'm sure everyone's had a client that's like, I have to get plus 95, or even some clients I have to get 100. And I think that we do live in a world now where sometimes it's just not realistic. Like, you can't have a page builder and paying $2 a month for hosting and realistically think that you're going to be, you know what I mean, that you're getting the max score. So it's really cool that you set the expectations. And I think having the examples you showed, having these huge organizations having low scores and say, look, you know, it isn't the be all or end all having, and just because you get 100, that doesn't automatically translate to your site's going to be bigger than YouTube sort of thing.
Why does it matter that you have better than Reddit? Why does it matter that you have better than Amazon? Like, what does that do? It doesn't matter too much, just vanity metric. Okay, well, if we can get that, that's great. Let's focus on getting the desired result you're looking for, not necessarily a metric that's just, you know, an A+.
Yep. Okay, that makes sense. We have a question from Giles, which I guess I'll just ask it quickly. How important are these metrics for like niche sites? So you know, it's just like maybe a small business selling a handful of products, or maybe not even an online store, just a really kind of niche site. How does are metrics not like important at all, or still important?
Yeah, they're important. The other thing, I forgot to mention this in the initial talk. So you have the 3 Core Web Vitals. You get green on all of them, right? It means you get a guaranteed search engine ranking benefit. If you're trying to compete with if you're trying to compete with Amazon, and they also have the 3 Core Web Vitals passed, so they're also getting the ranking benefit. At that point, the performance score does matter, because and I don't know exactly which one it's based off of. It might be still based off of how low your Core Web Vitals, like how good your green is, or your performance score. I would guess it would be based on how fast you are. So if you're both green, but you're faster than Amazon, then you get to beat Amazon. So, but that also scales down to niche sites. So if you get to like a mix of green and orange, so you can get the two other metrics to green, but you can only get LCP to orange for now. As long as you're getting some kind of benefit out of that, then you're going to win in your niche, because those small niches is like nobody's thinking about this yet. And so making sure that first input delay and cumulative layout shift, those are some of the easiest to pass. And eventually those other niche competitors will figure out how to pass those, but they're not thinking about that right now. Most of them, I would say the majority, 99% of them. And so, yeah, within those smaller niches, you can get way more benefit, and you can start to measure that improvement within Google page experience. So you can actually see exactly how much traffic benefit they're getting out of it. Another thing is to keep a note, though, that good page experience doesn't always show up. So for smaller projects, you might have to rely more on the field metrics that you're seeing pulled out of PageSpeed Insights than the data in Search Console, because the data in Search Console may not be there yet. I've seen anywhere from 200 to 2,000 monthly visitors, and they're still not getting any reports on their good page experience. And that's simply because this is a new metric. Google is still dialing in the infrastructure for it. And they're doing a slow rollout. So I imagine at some point it'll be very easy to see, like when you can get 100 visitors in a month, and it'll immediately show up, and it'll immediately show you're getting 0 or you're getting 10% good page experience. But that's going to be something before you even start the project. You need to see their Search Console and see if you can see like if that good page experience is being measured. And if it's at 0, that's excellent. Now you know exactly how much benefit they're getting out of your work. And that makes it way easier when you can show them the exact numbers of like, here's where we started, here's 30% of the project when the good page experience started picking up and you started getting that benefit, and here's where we are now.
Mm-hmm.
Does that answer? I forgot your original question.
No, that makes perfect sense. We have Stefano with another amazing question. Stefano gets like 5 gold stars for this one. Did you want to unmute your microphone, Stefano, or you want me to ask the question? Okay. Stefano asks, what recommendation you have for hosting headless WordPress? Is Edify a good enough example for an example?
The popular ones are going to be the easy ones. I'm personally a big fan of Netlify just because they make it very easy to start out. At scale, they're like if you're going past about 2,000 to 3,000 endpoints, it gets tricky to manage like those build times, right? Netlify's build limit is 30 minutes for building a site. And I'm on the desert arm, so I'm about halfway there on my build limit. And after that, I won't be able to build my sites anymore. And kind of an answer to that problem, that's a general problem within Headless and Jamstack. An answer to that problem has been where you're generating a certain number of sites initially, and then you are actually switching back to a form of server-side generation for the rest. And so you'll generate maybe 1,000 endpoints, and then the rest of them will be generated on demand. But the first, if it's data that doesn't change from load to load, then that endpoint will be generated on the first load, and then will be saved and served the same to everybody else, every subsequent load. And that's usually how that works. The kind of pioneer of that is Vercel, and Vercel is a competitor to Netlify as far as static application and serverless computing. And Vercel has a good solution but it only works with Next.js for now. Netlify is developing their own version of that. Vercel's is called incremental static generation, and Netlify's is called, I can't remember the name exactly, but they're working on developing it so it can work with any kind of framework. So you're not stuck to just not Next. You can do it with 11D or Next or whatever framework you're going to bring into that, and that gets you that benefit. From the majority of sites, like Netlify is going to be the pretty good.
Yeah, that makes sense.
There's also I believe it was HappyCog, a developer from HappyCog. He was doing a talk recently, and they actually used an even more advanced than Vercel. They were doing Cloudflare workers to generate their static resources. So they were doing an hour, 2-hour long build somewhere in a not publicly accessible space, and they were using Cloudflare workers to generate and save the data, the HTML generated from that data, or maybe it was just HTML that they were generating, and then they would cache that and store that. And that's a very advanced technique. But they were doing that for a site with millions of endpoints. And so when you're getting into the millions of endpoints, and you want to go with Jamstack, you can. I will say I had a call with Robin Scott to help me go through this, and he has. I don't want to share about.
He's here.
He is here.
He has Robin, you tell me if I'm saying too much. He has a property that has millions of endpoints that he doesn't use Jamstack at all. He just uses vanilla WordPress. Very precisely.
Sam is.
If you're looking.
Oh.
We're losing Sam there a second.
On connection.
Yeah, we're losing you, Sam.
We are losing Sam. This is actually this is Mr. Scott just switching off his internet there for a second.
I have another question for you. Yeah, you shut him off, Robin. Okay, Sam, I have another question for you. Is there any way to bulk look at, so if you're dealing with a site that large, or you're dealing with an endpoint with a page layout that is generating, I don't know, hundreds of blog posts, or is there a way to, because all of the tools look at individual pages. Is there something that'll rip through the entire site to tell you across the board, hey, these page types have these issues, these page types have, instead of having to test every single URL every time?
Yeah, the biggest one is search, is that's all provided for free within Search Console.
Mm-hmm.
So you go in there and it'll, I think even before it starts reporting on good page experience, it'll tell you the issues that you're running into, and it'll group the right page type. And so I have a property that there's a large chunk of them are video pages. And so it would tell me like, oh, you're loading this JavaScript that's not needed. And I could look at that and I was like, oh yeah, I can lazy load that, that's fine. And now if you want to go even further than that, there's all kinds of tools on GitHub that will, because Lighthouse is a developer tool that's open source, you can actually build your own script to analyze a site and go through all the pages. You have to be careful with to not overwhelm the request limit for the server. So you might have to spread out the requests. So if there's several thousand pages, you don't want, and you try to query them all at the same time, the server's going to be like, yeah, no, sorry, you're not allowed. We're blocking you. That happens with the VP engine every once in a while.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think this could be the last question. We're at an hour, and Marcel has a great question. I'm sure Marcel will want to unmute his microphone here. I'll just give him a second if he would like to ask the question, or not. Oh no, okay. Marcel asks, what are resources you would suggest at improving your core web vitals? So like, you're a developer, you want to improve, you want to offer a great service to clients. So what resources would you recommend to someone who's just starting out, who wants to really, something easy to read, easy to understand, almost easy to give you hints and tips on how to improve? What would you say the best places to start are?
The best place to start, which is funny you should ask, let me see if I can, is going to be that sam.lc/faster. That URL is all the resources the best resources that I've collected on it. Also a few talks from Google directly and from other experts on Core Web Vitals. And you could go through that list. As far as specific resources, Google Search Console is going to be a big one that a lot of people don't know about. There's actually, again, there's a link in that Faster resources site that will that links directly to where you can find the good page experience data for the web properties that you manage in Google Search Console, so you can see the impact across the different web properties that you're involved in. And besides that, it's just getting into some of the Lighthouse ecosystem. There's a lot of cool, if you go on GitHub, there's a lot of cool tools. If you want to run a little bit of Node, you can, it would be Node probably. You can explore libraries that have automated measuring and automated testing and can report on things like this. And yeah, as I find more resources, I'll add them to that. It's like that link, it goes to a Notion document. And so I just update it as I find things. And so you can check there. If you have a specific question about a specific type of tool, I might be able to help as well. You can tweet me at that guy Sam, or just it's the same on Instagram. You can message me there. There should be a link in that sam.lc/faster. Before we do wrap up, I do want to definitely thank Robin Scott he did a 3-hour call with me and helped review a lot of this content. And I really appreciate that. It was very generous of him to put that time in.
Yes, he really is awesome when it comes to stuff like that. Well, that was the perfect unscripted final question. Moving on to the last slide beautifully there. Thank you, Mr. Smith. So I wanted to thank everyone for being here. A special thanks to Sam for doing this talk. It was really great. Some really great insight there.